Hello again, everybody. This is John Norris at Trading Perspectives. As always, we have our good friends Sam Clement and Courtney Trush. Y'all say hello.
How's it going?
Hey, guys.
Hey, I hope you are doing well today.
Yep.
All right. Now, Sam, Courtney is always full of a lot of questions. We know that, right?
That's right.
And Courtney was reading something recently about social media, and, she told me she had some questions she wanted to ask us about just social media and Facebook and all that stuff and its impact really on just things economic and societal and otherwise.
Yeah.
Isn't that right, Courtney?
That's right, John. I think you must be hiding under a rock if you haven't been seeing something on the news about Facebook and the whistleblower and all of that. So I just was curious to ask y'all what effects you think that might have on the economy as it is.
What's Facebook? Kind of looking at Courtney with kind of a shocked expression. Yeah, well, that's a great question because here we are. I mean, certainly when I was growing up, which was a very long time ago, primarily in the 80s, not necessarily in the 70s, like Courtney suggested earlier. And what did you say about the 70s? Like really short shorts and big hair?
No, I said that about the 80s. Have really short shorts and big hair. Sam doesn't even know that time period. He wasn't alive then.
I was like 20 years from being a human at that point.
Thanks.
And with that, we're going to have some very impromptu associate reviews right now. but back when I was growing up, clearly we didn't have any sort of social media, whatnot. I mean, shucks, I had left my previous employer and we were starting Oakworth when the iPhone came out. So, I mean, social media, Facebook, Instagram, all that stuff, Twitter, Pinterest, all of it is relatively new. I mean, truthfully it is. Yeah. It's only about 13, 14 years old at its maximum, so it's very difficult for someone in my generation to fully understand the full impact on it because I'm not really as attached to social media as maybe people of a younger generation.
Well, I think there is obviously tons of impacts to it. I think both positive and negative, and that's where kind of the difficulty comes in because and you got to run away from anyone who's saying it is all good or it's all bad because there is definitely tons of nuance to it and there's definitely, inarguably, tons of benefits to it. However, I mean, that's what this whistleblower was about. There's tons of downsides to it and tons of dangers that come with social media, and it just feeds on human nature.
Well, I think all of us have different perspectives, right? So, John, you didn't have it growing up, but your children have always had social media.
That's right.
And I had it for myself starting later in my schooling, right? So college is when Facebook started out, but that was kind of limited. And now I have young children who are growing up with always having some access to technology, not necessarily social media yet. Mm-hmm. And Sam, you probably haven't lived a day of your life without having social media.
I got social media in high school, so I definitely had a period without it.
Well, I mean, in terms of, according going back to your original question, in terms of its impact on the economy, I'm not so old where I can't see the benefits for social media, just sort of in general. It's just the relaying of information, which always generates new ideas, and that's always been an avenue for creativity, is just the sharing of ideas. Going back all the way back in history, the Renaissance happened because of the Crusades where cultures were colliding and sharing information. So social media does have a very big benefit on just allowing people to share information and communicate with others. And so in that way, it's, in my estimation, it benefits the economy and society.
And just the ease of creating your own business is something that I think is so prevalent on social media right now. I mean, the amount of people who have a blog that starts selling something or, linking things and they get commission from it. I mean, there is a whole creator economy just within social media, especially Instagram and then probably even Facebook as well. But people who are able to start their businesses and have sales the first day of it versus something that would have been pretty incomprehensible even 20 years ago, to start a business and immediately start selling things all across the globe.
Well, I mean, there's some of the things that I just really it's hard for me to grasp are like Instagram influencers or social media influencers.
You're not selling anything.
It's just
having people follow you.
Yeah, having people follow you, and companies will pay for you to do some product placement on some of your posts.
Mm-hmm. And that's what's wild is they really are bringing value. It sounds silly that you have followers, but then you are now valuable to any sort of company who then wants to use you to get their product or message or whatever it may be out.
So actually, in that regard, it also helps marketing agencies and companies get their product out to more people than they might ordinarily otherwise.
Yeah.
And I definitely have bought into that. There is a Instagram account that I follow, and there is an obsession over a certain cup that I purchased, and I mean, when they sell these cups, you only have a certain time period in which you can buy it, and
So
and
you believe that?
yes, I do believe that, and I'm the sucker that is the one frantically waking up early to buy it.
How many cups have you purchased like this?
Okay, well, I've purchased multiple, but for gifts, I currently own 2, and I'm cutting myself off. But
Can't imagine what they are.
But I'll just say you're right, because I actually have been influenced in that regard because someone else has tested it and I trust based off of buying other things, and it's brought those products to me that I wouldn't have necessarily had access to or seen before. So
I mean, so economically speaking, I think overall social media is a net positive, economically speaking, in my estimation.
I mean, even the downsides of it are economically positive, at least for the companies themselves.
Well, I mean, you're right. In terms of companies selling stuff, I mean, the downsides are people spend way too much time on their social media where they could be doing something a little bit more productive.
And the divisiveness of it, I mean, that just makes people want to go back to it more and more and more, and that's obviously good. If you have more users staying on it longer, you can charge more for advertisements, and that's good for any of the platforms.
Yeah.
Well, I think, obviously we're talking about some of the positives, but there's also some negatives. Like, all of us are able to maybe have more developed mind and can understand, when things aren't accurate, or when to kind of how to formulate our own decisions rather than letting other people influence us. And I think that was one of the big things, is they said that, Facebook amplifies hate, misinformation, and political unrest. And how do we see that affecting, whether or not the government has the right to step in, and how would that affect the economy if the government feels the need to continue to do that with social media?
Wow, that's a lot you threw at us right there. That's a ton. I will tell you, just being a consumer of some social media, I'm not terribly active on my social media platforms. I do have accounts on a couple of them. Sometimes it's hard not to get your feelings hurt. I mean, in a lot of ways. I mean, you see people that you know, and they're out doing stuff, but then at the same time, you see people like, well, why aren't you having more fun in life than having to post this? I think we've all seen post on whatever your social media platform, someone taking a picture of their dinner. And,
yes.
saying,
especially at a restaurant,
at a restaurant,
dimly lit restaurant, and a flash picture comes on.
Yeah, and just having a good time with my sweetums and a glass of wine, something like that. No, you're not. You're not having fun doing that because you're messing around on whatever social media platform. And I had another time when a close friend of mine, actually, I knew he was overseas somewhere, sent a picture of where he was, and I said, thanks, I'm going to go steal your grill now, and that type of stuff. So he didn't think that was as funny as I was, as I did. But there is downside to it. I mean, if a 53-year-old man can go online and take a look at Facebook, Instagram, and kind of go, gee, I feel kind of left out on some stuff. I can't imagine what it's like to be a teenage boy or girl, or someone who's a little bit more impressionable than perhaps I am. Some of this stuff must really have a warped impact on personalities.
Well, the saying "keeping up with the Joneses" was always in reference to your neighbors before, because that's who you saw every day, and now it's everybody and anybody you want it to be, and that is where I think some of the difficulty comes from, is because I guess typically your neighbors are probably in a pretty similar socioeconomic class. Mm-hmm. Now people are following, these celebrities, what have you, people, and there's a whole business around making yourself seem richer than you are. I've even seen these like fake planes that you can go take pictures on, like you're flying on a private jet, and take pictures there. And
where are those? I
don't know. I figured you may know, John. But no, I mean that's where a lot of the danger comes from. Is I think that keeping up with the Joneses, and how it's really anybody, and there's always somebody out there doing more, and making their life seem so much better than it is, and that just warps everyone's expectations, especially younger people.
Yeah, so that's where I think the danger of social media is. It's not the economic aspect of it. Economically, I think it's good. I mean, as I mentioned already, just sharing information, better to market products and ideas, services even, but it's sort of that impact on more impressionable people in our society as they take a look at things that might not be true, and taking a look at sort of a warped version of reality, and thinking that that hyperbole is the norm, and that's what's frustrating to me. And that's what I think the biggest downside to social media is.
Yeah, and I guess to kind of follow with what you're saying, or what I'm perceiving you're saying, is that the fact that everyone thinks that their voice, it's the anonymity, or right, or the anonymity that they have. Is that the right word? Yeah, sure.
You tell me. Yeah, sure.
Well, I mean, the fact that anybody can be anybody online, right? I'm not going to have to.
Anonymity.
Oh, thank you. It was somewhere in there.
Yeah.
But I think it's the fact that, like, I can pretend to be whoever I want to be online and say mean things without ever having to say it to your face. And, you think back to bullying when, we were younger and somebody was physically either, saying something to your face or doing something to you, and it wasn't necessarily, behind this perfect, like, concealed thing where you don't really know who's doing it to you. And I think, to be fair, right?
Like that. The thing is, I've done that,
But it used to be like star 67 or star 69 or something.
Star 69,
yeah. Okay, well, all right.
Yeah,
but
you probably never grew up at a time where you could do phony phone calls.
Oh, yeah, I did.
Okay, well.
They didn't have caller ID?
You could do star 60, was it 69 or 67?
No, I'm talking about where you're instigating the phony phone call. Back when I was doing phony phone calls in the 70s and early 80s, you didn't have any star 69. You just call up someone and just, Mr. Walls there? Miss Walls there? Any of the Walls there? No. Then how's your house standing up? That's the sort of corny stuff that we used to do. It's really pretty bad. No, but in terms of anonymity, okay, I'm going to tell myself right now, years ago, back when AOL was a thing, I had
the dial-up?
Fraternity brother who was famously not on AOL. Well, I went out and I created a name in his name, and it's just, he had a very particular name, I'm not going to name it, and just at AOL.com, and joined this group that all my other pledge brothers and whatnot were in, and I said some of the weirdest stuff under this guy's, avatar or whatnot, and people thought it was him, until finally I had to admit it. So if I could do that, and I could dupe my people, my close friends, which made me kind of wonder why I have any friends with that type of behavior. It's very easy to imagine some Eastern European or someone out there creating these phony names and going out there and just fomenting discord throughout our society. Sam, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's, I think I told you there's some stat that like 17 out of the 20 top right-wing Facebook pages were run by Eastern European, essentially troll groups. and I think you're absolutely right. And I think that's something that's a problem for everybody, but is especially a problem for minors, people whose brains aren't developed enough to kind of
sense of self.
Yeah. I think that's where the real danger is. And I think, I'm assuming all three of us are in agreement that that's where the real danger is and comes from social media.
So should the government step in regarding mental health and news accuracy and require some disclaimer to be...
Well, disclaimers, we've talked about this. We have a disclaimer on a lot of stuff. Heck, even your mattress has a disclaimer.
Bleach, this is not meant to be drank.
So, you put that on bleach. You have to put caution is hot on there. Even this cup that we use in the office has hot stuff or something, like maybe not hot stuff, but we put a label warning on just about everything. So should the government put a warning label on this? And that's where it starts getting a little bit of a slippery slope, because we do have the First Amendment, which for all intents and purposes should outlaw censorship from the government level. If the government is coming in and doing some form of censorship on these social media sites, you could say maybe it's a violation of the First Amendment. And so it's a slippery slope. You let the government come in and do that type of stuff, then all of a sudden it's kind of like death by a thousand cuts, and before you know it, it's the government's way in there, and we are stifling free speech.
That's where I think the asterisk comes in, comparing social media to cigarettes or hot coffee or what have you, these other things that have disclaimers on them, is that you have the First Amendment that goes along with it. And my standing position is that the government should be involved with as little as they possibly can be. And this is something that is definitely tricky with that. It's hard for me to imagine, it's the government stepping in and adding disclaimers to things, that this wouldn't become politicized. I think you've seen it even with the COVID-19 disclaimers on a lot of the social media stuff. they were putting COVID disclaimers on things that turned out to be true a year later. And I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of that, but there's problems with that because at that time, people didn't want some things to be talked about. So you just put COVID disclaimers on it. And there is always going to be a political party that it's hard not to view as being behind some of it.
I just wonder, as we talk more and more about mental health, and I'm kind of shifting gears off of necessarily the First Amendment and free speech, but when you look at, okay, probably back in the day, long before John was born.
Is that possible?
Yes. Imagine that. It's a long, long time ago. There might have been young kids who smoked. There might have been young kids who drank. Starting at 12. There might be now, but I'm just saying that the government now has said at a certain age, you're deemed where you can drive a car. You can't, you have to attain a certain age to drink a beer, to smoke a cigarette. And those all have disclaimers, right? Mm-hmm. And so I wonder if, and I don't know how you would police it, right? But is there a future in which we're the mental health aspect? I mean, you hear about people being affected in a very bad way from social media. Is there something that needs to be stepped up in the regards of the government saying this isn't healthy for our youth to have exposure at such a young age?
I think there's definitely a good point to that in the sense that there's an age for alcohol and cigarettes and things like that because your brain is not developed enough for those things. And I don't think social media is any different in that regard. I don't think people's brains are developed enough to be able to healthily intake social media, whatever channels you're using. And so, but I think the question goes down to whose responsibility is it to put an age limit on that?
Well, you're right about that. And, the argument could be made for the government to have sort of a warning label or force the social media outlets to have a warning label on it, and perhaps such a warning label or whatever shape it might take might be enough to kind of have some parents kind of wake up saying, hey, you're not going to do this. You're not going to have a Facebook page. You're not going to have an Instagram page. You're not going to have whatever page. Teenagers will get around it. They'll continue to do it, but at least making a step in the right direction where we can cut out maybe some of the biggest abuse.
And I think that's a big point is that, in my opinion, this responsibility ultimately falls on the parents. I think it's not the government's job to parent individuals, parent kids. It is not the government's job to tell them what they're supposed to be doing. And so that's where I'll kind of put my foot down. I mean, I would be all for people not being able to use social media platforms under the age of 18 or whatever we decide, 16, what have you, just to keep young minors off of it. But I also don't think it's the government's job to be doing that. So it's kind of a conundrum because I would agree with them if they did put something on, but I think you have to take a step back and realize who has that power.
Yeah,
and I don't think it's the government.
And getting the government in and deciding what's appropriate and what's inappropriate on social media, that does take us down into a slippery slope. I mean, it really does. And I don't think there's a single answer here that would placate everyone.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, do you have any other thoughts about this? Because this is something that's here to stay, and I think we've mostly agreed that the economic benefits from social media are vast.
Oh, inarguably.
Yeah, and whereas some of the societal aspects of it are certainly a little bit more muddy.
I mean, we've talked about it before. I think even last year, just the divisiveness and how things continue to get more divisive. And we brought up the example: if you used to want your opinion out in the open, you had to either write the letter to the newspaper to put it in that.
You actually had to put some
thought into it and really want them, and probably put your name with it to have it in the paper.
Yeah.
Now it's anybody can say anything
under any name that they want to do.
Sure.
But even our news outlets, half the time you can find plenty of errors and typos and stuff like that, just because they're just trying to pump it out, how many posts they can get, how many clicks,
shares and likes and all that stuff.
And I think that a lot of people won't even watch the news now because they're saying, oh, it's not. I don't trust the news is really accurate. It's one political party leaning more than another. So I think it may be in part of this process is you're kind of questioning the accuracy of all information received, whether it's through social media or on the news or if you still get a paper.
Well, you're right about that, but then again, perhaps maybe that was always the case and we just didn't know it. We didn't have access to a bunch of different media outlets. You know, we had the primary networks and the Birmingham News and Birmingham Post Herald, which were owned by the same company, if I'm not mistaken. So we had one outlet for news, and that we had to accept that as truth. Whereas now we have a ton of different outlets for news, and that's when you have to decide what is the truth.
I mean, you can go on Twitter and find videos of someone at the scene of something going on 30 minutes, an hour before any news company gets there. And so the news is already out there before the news companies are able, and it's just a different world.
Yeah, it is. I'm not sure there's a right answer in terms of the societal aspect of it whatsoever.
Right.
So,
but overall, it's good for the economy.
It's good for the economy. And Sam and I, and now you, Courtney, look through the world through an economic lens, of course.
Yes.
So with that, guys, thank you all so much for listening. We always love to hear from you all. So if you have any comments or questions, by all means, please let us know. You can always leave us a review on the podcast outlet of your choice, or drop us a line at tradingperspectives@oakworth.com. As always, if you're interested in reading more or hearing more of what we have to say or how we think, please, by all means, go to oakworth.com. Take a look underneath the Thought Leadership tab for all kinds of awesome information. All right, Sam, Courtney, any last thoughts here on the social media?
That's all I got.
Yeah, that's a lot.
That is a lot. Y'all take care.